The landlord raised her rent, so she bought the whole apartment complex. In the quiet pulse of a city that never truly slept, Maya Thompson woke up to a world that felt both familiar and cruelly indifferent. The hum of early morning traffic, the distant chatter of life unfolding arear, it was all the same. Yet something had shifted. On her kitchen counter lay a letter that would test everything she had built, everything she had fought for, and everything she had yet to become. Her landlord had raised the rent again. For the third time in 2 years, the neatly printed notice declared a new amount, one that she could barely afford. The words were polite, even apologetic, as if typed by someone who had forgotten that homes were not just properties, but lives contained within walls. For Maya, that single piece of paper was more than a bill. It was a statement of power, of who owned what, and who didn't. She stared at the letter, feeling the silent ache of frustration rise through her chest. This one-bedroom apartment had been her sanctuary through countless nights of exhaustion and hope. It was here she had written her first business plan. It was here she had cried over rejection letters. And it was here on this very floor that she had decided her life would mean more than survival. But survival had a way of mocking even the most determined hearts. Maya worked as a junior analyst at a small marketing firm. Not glamorous, not high-paying, but steady. Her income barely covered rent, bills, and a modest contribution to her savings. She had dreams, though. Restless, ambitious dreams that would not quiet down no matter how many times life tried to shrink them. She folded the letter, placed it neatly beside her cup of half-drunk coffee, and stood by the window. The apartment complex stretched outward, a patchwork of lives she barely knew. Families, couples, students, retirees. It was an ecosystem of struggle and quiet perseverance. And for all their differences, they shared one thing. Every year, the rent went up. And every year, someone moved out. That afternoon, as she rode the bus to work, Maya's thoughts were consumed by the same loop of worry and indignation. But underneath the frustration, something else stirred, a defiant ember that refused to go out. What if the story didn't have to end this way? What if, instead of surrendering, she could change the rules entirely? The thought was absurd, impossible even. She could barely afford her current rent. The idea of buying property, let alone the whole complex, was laughable. But sometimes impossibility was simply the disguise of destiny. Over the next few weeks, Maya's curiosity became obsession. She started researching, late nights buried in online forums, real estate blogs, and investment tutorials. She devoured books on finance and property ownership, learning a language that once felt foreign. She discovered that property wasn't just about money, it was about leverage, timing, and vision. Every number she studied, every spreadsheet she built seemed to whisper the same truth. Ownership wasn't a privilege reserved for the wealthy. It was a mindset, a strategy, a long game. Maya began attending free seminars on real estate investment. She listened, took notes, asked questions. Surrounded by people who seemed light years ahead of her, she felt out of place but also alive. The more she learned, the more she realized that wealth wasn't always about inheritance or luck. It was about decisions taken early and taken boldly. Still, knowledge alone wasn't enough. She needed capital, and she had none. Her savings, though consistent, were modest at best. But then she learned something that changed everything. She didn't need to buy with her own money. There were partnerships, loans, and creative financing strategies used by people who had started with even less than her. The idea began to take shape, fragile but undeniable. She started small. She reached out to old colleagues, mentors, and friends, sharing her research and her plan. Some laughed. Some ignored her messages. But a few listened, and one of them, a retired business consultant named Richard, saw the spark in her that others missed. He became her silent guide, teaching her the fundamentals of negotiation, risk assessment, and persuasion. Through his mentorship, Maya learned how to approach banks, how to read contracts, and how to analyze the true value of a property beyond its surface. She learned to see not just walls and windows, but opportunity hidden in plain sight. Months passed. Her apartment's rent was due for another increase soon, and her landlord's letters had become routine. But this time Maya didn't feel powerless. She had been preparing, building something invisible but real. One morning she saw a small sign posted near the entrance gate. For sale. Entire property. Inquiries contact below. Her heart stopped. It was the very building she lived in. Fate, it seemed, had been listening. The asking price was astronomical, far beyond her reach. But instead of despair, Maya felt a strange calm. She reached out to the listed agent, arranged a meeting, and spent days running numbers, researching market trends, and reviewing comparable properties. She discovered that the owner was an older man looking to retire, eager to sell quickly but unwilling to drop the price too much. It was a narrow opening, but it was enough. Maya didn't have millions, but she had something just as powerful: a plan. She crafted a proposal that involved bringing in small investors, people who could contribute portions of the purchase price in exchange for a share of ownership. It was risky, unconventional, but brilliantly structured. Her pitch meetings were relentless. Some days she faced rejection after rejection. Other days she saw glimpses of belief flicker in the eyes of those who listened. Piece by piece, she built her investor group: young professionals, small business owners, even a couple of tenants from the same complex who wanted stability. It took 6 months of grinding work, and every ounce of courage she had. But one afternoon, standing in a small office surrounded by stacks of paperwork, Maya signed her name on the final line. She wasn't just a tenant anymore. She was the owner. The ink was barely dry when reality sank in. Ownership wasn't just about pride, it was about responsibility. There were maintenance issues, financial management, and tenant relations to handle. It was overwhelming. But for the first time in her life, the fear she felt was matched by purpose. Instead of raising rents, Maya froze them. She prioritized repairs, beautified common areas, and organized community events. The complex transformed, not just in appearance, but in spirit. The tenants, once weary of uncertainty, began to trust again. And in that trust, Maya found her greatest return on investment. News spread quickly. A young woman who once struggled to pay rent now owned the building she had nearly been forced to leave. Local media picked up her story, and soon she was being interviewed, invited to speak, and celebrated as a symbol of resilience and courage. But Maya knew the truth. This wasn't just her victory. It was the story of every person who had been told they didn't belong at the table and decided to build their own. Years later, as she stood on the rooftop of her complex, watching the sunset bathe the city in gold, Maya thought back to that morning. The letter, the fear, the uncertainty. It all seemed like a lifetime ago. What had once been a notice of defeat had become the spark of transformation. The journey had been long, filled with doubt and sacrifice. But through it all, Maya learned that power doesn't come from wealth. It comes from vision, grit, and the courage to act when the world expects you to fold. And though she had achieved what many called impossible, Maya wasn't done yet. Her success had opened a new path, one that stretched far beyond a single apartment complex. She had plans to mentor others, to create opportunities for those who stood where she once had, overwhelmed, unseen, but hungry for more. As the city lights began to flicker awake beneath her, Maya smiled. The world had once told her she was just a tenant in someone else's empire, but now she was building empires of her own. And this was only the beginning.